Hello there. This is a subject that's been on my mind for a while, and I've been thinking about making a video on this for quite some time. But I suppose recent events have sort of galvanized me into action, into actually doing this video. So, um, if you look at the history of politics and religion, you can see that they're deeply tied together. You could trace back this to ancient Sumer, really, to the Mesopotamians, where you have a sort of, not exactly a theocracy, but sort of a very deep connection between the sort of state religion and the power structure of the politics at the time, with the monarchy and sort of the priesthood. And this is something that has been carried on down. You'll see the very similar thing in ancient Egypt, of course, a theocracy with the pharaoh being the literal head of state and sort of the figurehead of the Egyptian religion. Of course, the real power religiously was with the priesthood, and they had a lot of the political power as well. And this is something that's carried on in various forms. You have anomalous structures such as Athens and the democracy there, and sort of general Greek approach to government was not particularly religious. But then, if you then look at the Romans, you'll find they had a state religion, which was sort of based on the Greek pantheon, more or less. They just have different names for the same gods. And this was an official state religion, and part of that was of the imperial leader, the Caesar, who became deified, sort of joining this pantheon in a way. And this, of course, changed with Christianity, where they just basically decapitated the pantheon and replaced it with with Jesus and sort of the Jewish God Yahweh or Jehovah, as I think the Roman name. So again, politics and religion deeply tied together. So you had the Pontiff Maximus, who was like the ruler, but also the chief priest. So the Caesar, who was a dictator, that's where the word dictator comes from. Actually, it's from Rome. Julius Caesar was named as dictator for life, and then his family went on to become the imperium, starting with Augustus Caesar, who was his nephew. At that time, Christianity was sort of only just really wasn't even begun at that point. But later on, I think it was in the reign of Tiberius that I think Jesus was born, and then you have several emperors in by the time that Christianity is really becoming established as a major cult. Constantine was the one that sort of took up Christianity as this growing religion, which can then be sort of subverted and taken over, if you will, and used as a psychological tool, as a sort of form of spiritual rule as opposed to military rule. And you could argue that worked so well that it extended the life of the Western Roman Empire for hundreds of years, and of course the Eastern Roman Empire, which was part of the same thing, ending up surviving after Rome declined, as Byzantium. That was also a religious empire, theocracy, very much Greek influenced, but they consider themselves to still be Romans. And that part of the religious theocracy survived in Eastern Europe up into Russia, etc. and still has some influence today, although of course Constantinople was sacked in the 1500s and became part of the Islamic Empire, which of course is another theocracy. The basis of Islamic life is a merger of both religion and politics. So the caliphs were both religious and political leaders. And over time we've had a desire to move away, in many cases, from a theocratic model where religion and politics are tied together. I suppose people hark back to the Greeks as an example of a secular society that isn't based on some kind of religion. And really you get this sort of seeds of this emerging in Britain with the Cromwellian period. You had prior to that, Ireland had been sort of partially conquered by Henry VIII. Henry VIII, who broke away from Rome, decided to declare himself King of Ireland, and in doing so also instituted the Church of Ireland, with him again as both king that he named himself and sort of ruler of the church, the head of the church, and trying to sort of impose that on Ireland, which was fairly pathetic. It was actually his daughter Elizabeth I who succeeded in the conquest of Ireland. And during this process, Rome declared war on Britain, on England, sorry, I should say, a Catholic war against the heretic Queen of England, and trying to stir up the Irish to launch a war of invasion against England. That was sort of a plan that never quite unfolded. The Spanish were supposed to sort of invade Ireland and from there invade England and reclaim the Protestant territories. You also had a obviously massive political and religious war in France. That culminated, I suppose, in the end with the revolution in France and a sort of secular, anti-religious government for some time. And you had like a huge conflict between the Protestants and the Catholics throughout the Netherlands. At one point, Spain invaded the Netherlands and sort of took it over in order to sort of, destroy the Protestant uprising, I suppose, more than anything. And in Germany as well, huge amount of religious conflict there. So you had like what's called the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation, which led to massive slaughter throughout Europe. I suppose that you had, for a short time before Cromwell invaded Ireland, a little republic. I think it lasted for about 9 years in Ireland, and that was of course completely dismantled by Cromwell. And then subsequent to Cromwell, you had the Stuarts sort of strengthening of the imperial hold on Ireland and the whole of the UK. So, and it took quite some time before you had the emancipation of the Catholics in Ireland and throughout Britain, not just Ireland. That would be the end of the 19th century that really came about. So in the country which I live in, which is Ireland, you now have a republic. There had of course been a republic in France before, short-lived because the Bourbon monarchy were reinstated. I suppose the real republic that sort of lasted and is still here today is the American Republic, and that was founded on sort of secular lines with a sort of anti-theocratic theme, in that freedom of religion is supposedly guaranteed by the Constitution, which means you can be anything you like. You can be a Catholic, a Protestant, a Muslim. You can be a Zoroastrian. You can worship Satan. You can worship Mickey Mouse if you want. Whatever religion you want to be, you do have officially under the Constitution the right and the freedom to practice whatever religion you want. So this establishment of secular rule has been hard won, not just in America. From that point onwards, there has been sort of pretty much religious freedom in the United States of America. But these battles have gone on in other parts of the world too. And in Europe particularly, which I'm more familiar with, there was a tremendous battle to achieve religious freedom. But the Catholic Church was incredibly powerful in France, and now you have a sort of a secular republic there, but it was no easy feat to get rid of them. And particularly Ireland, which is my greatest area of interest at the moment, you have a strange situation where a republic was declared in 1916, and it was effectively came into some kind of existence with the creation of the Free State in 1921, and then obviously there was a terrible civil war for 2 years, but the full established state came a little bit later, which was complete republic. But that was supposed to be along the lines of the American model of freedom of religion. But what in fact happened was a sort of coup by the Catholic Church, especially under John Charles McQuaid, who was more or less really the unofficial Prime Minister of Ireland, with the huge control he had, especially over Eamon de Valera. So really, up and really to the end of this last century, up to about 2000, really, that was the death knell of the Catholic Church. But I mean, back in the 90s was the beginning of the collapse of the Catholic Church. We had an unbelievable grip on Irish society. For people outside of Ireland, it's hard for them to really comprehend the level of control that they had over all aspects of Irish life. But this all came apart really with the scandals around particularly clerical abuse of young children. The paedophilia basically is what I'm talking about. I'm not going to go into that in any detail. There's many videos and articles about that where you can look into all of that, what happened during the 90s and onwards. But that actually rocked the church to the point where they no longer had control, and the state in fact wrestled back control of many institutions, particularly education and the health service from the Catholic Church. But what's happened in the last, I suppose, really the last 15 years particularly, is a strange process of religion sort of being infiltrated by politics, rather than politics having been sort of controlled and infiltrated by religious functions and religious organizations. The opposite seems to be happening. You look at the Church of Ireland and the Church of England, and also the pagan movement within Ireland particularly. A strange insertion of politics seems to have asserted itself. 20 years ago, I could say that much of the New Age religions and neo-paganism, and probably most of the Christian churches, like the Church of Ireland, were apolitical. They didn't really get involved in politics, in sort of the sort of social engineering aspects of politics. There would be occasional commentaries about certain events that would happen, and reference to sort of political events of a time in relation to what, say, Jesus might say about it, or whatever. Whatever religion it is, it would be related to the set of ethics that are part of your religious code. But people weren't particularly heavy-handed about it. Whereas what's happened over the last 15 years is there's a sort of very much an insertion of political ideology into religion. And that's particularly bad, I would say, in the neo-pagan movement, which has been completely subverted to a large extent by religious ideas, to some extent from the far right. I suppose that's where it seemed to spring from first, with sort of people involved in heathenry and sort of Celtic religious belief, Celtic paganism I'm talking about, sort of referring to Nazism and sort of very far right ideas, which some could be linked to Nietzsche or whatever. This created a backlash, of course, from the opposite end of the spectrum, which the far left. But what seems to have happened since then is that the far left ideology has become more and more powerful, more and more outspoken, and has sort of pretty much dominated the conversation within ethics in modern neo-paganism, to the point that all other voices would have been drowned out. What seems to be happening now, though, is, I think, a bit of a backlash against that. People are rather tired of being told what they can think, how they should practice their religion, what is politically acceptable. And essentially, we spent the best part of 100 years trying to get a secular government and to extricate the Catholic Church out of religion, out of politics in Irish life. But here we have like an attempt to insert politics into religion, sort of like the reverse, if you like, to tie these two things back together again, the politics and the religion once again tied to each other. And I think, regardless of whether you're left or right, I think this is a really bad idea, that religious freedom should mean that you can practice your religion in any way you want, and that it shouldn't be tied to politics in any particular way. And likewise, whatever your political beliefs are, they shouldn't have to be tied to any one particular religion or any religious philosophy. The two things do not need to go hand in hand. In fact, I think it's probably better for all if these things are separated. That you can see, like through thousands of years of history, the incredible amount of damage and harm, all the wars, all the struggles for power that have been very clearly associated between sort of the marriage of religion and politics, particularly in theocratic governments. So I would argue that they should remain entirely separate. Politics and religion do not mix well together, and they should, as far as possible, be kept separate. I'm not saying people should never be allowed to express an opinion about political issues within the framework of religious conversation, but I think this attempt to actually marry the two together once more is extremely misguided and possibly quite dangerous in terms of people's freedom and their rights to have an open society and a diversity of opinion and different ways of seeing the world, different schools of thought, which I think that is very important. One of the key tenets of my belief is freedom of expression. I'd very much be a libertarian, and I think if you go down this path of theocratic government and institutionalizing religious ideas, then it creates a very dangerous precedent and gets into the denial of freedom and a sort of form of religious totalitarianism that will inevitably unfold if it's allowed to continue unchecked. So I really, really think this is something that people need to think about, and I think we're sort of at a crucial point where these ideas of religious domination of the political sphere are either going to take hold or they will just gradually recede into the background, and vice versa with the politicization of religion. Either this will be kicked into touch and be sort of just not tolerated, or it's going to just take over the entire conversation. So I think we're at a crossroads, really. There is definitely a kickback against politicization of religion, and a resistance to the religiousization of politics. You've got this sort of extreme Christian far right who are sort of trying to insert themselves into politics as well at the moment. So I think from both ends of a political spectrum, you've got some very, very dangerous ideas which are being pushed. So I think this is something that we really have to be aware of and actually deal with it, because I think denial will just lead to a creeping merger of religion and politics once again, which is not something that I want to see. So anyway, that's all I'm going to say for now. I hope you found that interesting. I'd be interested to know what other people think about this. Do you see it as a problem? And if so, how do we deal with this? How do you think this problem is best dealt with? And if you've enjoyed what I had to say, please like the video. And if you want to subscribe, I'd be very grateful for that too. So that's it for today. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.